So today we're going to talk about moving or migrating from Google Docs to an EPUB. And an EPUB is essentially how you read a book on your Kindle or on your Nook. It's a necessary format for you to be able to migrate to those platforms. You cannot just push a Google Doc, which is kind of a bit of a pain, but it makes sense. When you are making that migration, there are some free tools available for you. I'm not endorsing any of these. For you to be able to make that migration. However, the one that I chose was one called Vellum. Vellum does not migrate from EPUB to paperback format, and that's very important to know because this is a software which costs money. It's a Mac only software, so you might not want to do this if you are constrained by cost. But I think that it's actually a pretty valuable tool. It helps you learn a lot about just how to start. I think this is an easy way to sort of get your toes wet with respect to formatting. I'll talk to you a little bit more about sort of migrating from Google Docs to an actual paperback format. The tool that I use for that is called Affinity. I'll discuss that at a future date. But I started with Vellum and then turned to Affinity, and if I hadn't had Vellum as my playground, I probably wouldn't have understood so much going into Affinity. So this is a pretty simple tool. Once you get it migrated, you have, your title info here. You just put your title, your name, what have you. It has pre-built pages for you that you can add or sort of remove. You can add different elements. What I mean by elements is things like a sort of page break or a design element. Let's see. Let's add an element. Let's add a copyright page. So this is nice too because it comes with a pre-built, pre-formatted sort of general copyright. I highly suggest that you look at other people's copyright pages before you just go forth with this. This is pretty light, but it is super valuable to have. You definitely should copyright your books. We'll talk about that. I think we'll talk about that in a different phase as well. But you should have a copyright for your books, and you should always add a copyright page. And this is super important when you're thinking about your IP, that's called intellectual property, and your ownership thereof. And if you don't have this, you might not have the sort of capability of denying that you never offered this to anybody when you send it out in the world without a sort of front and center page saying this is my intellectual property. There are also different sort of ornamental breaks too. These are kind of nice because it makes your page look a little bit more professional. So I'll show you one of mine. So this is Razor Blade, and when I got in here, I'll kind of bring it down a little bit for you. When I got in here, I start with the title page, my name, my title. I have a separate page here in my publisher logo. I have contents, which is helpful. It generates that automatically. A prologue. So here's the thing, if you ever try to copy and paste out of here, it can be a problem because it says it's trying to prevent people from stealing your work. So copy and paste is kind of not suggested. If you try and copy and paste outside of this, it'll say excerpt from book. So I know that when I did this, one of the mistakes that I sort of came into was that in my migration of Google Docs into this, I actually just rewrote everything. You don't have to do that. There's an easy button somewhere that essentially says like migrate to EPUB based on what you have, but this gave me more control. So I wanted to do it manually. The problem is that I actually edited a few things in here that were different from my Google Doc, and I never made a sort of most up-to-date version, so that was my mistake, and I definitely need to make sure that I keep doing that. But so you should always have a referenceable source of truth somewhere. I do highly recommend, if you have the time and the ability, to just rewrite, because you will never not benefit from extra eyes on this, especially as you're starting sort of almost from scratch in this writing section. Over here, sort of some components here, right? Always being super cautious about some of these. Let's see if I can find myself a page break. I definitely have one of those in here. But it is kind of limited in its design capabilities. It does have only a few small select capabilities on the out-of-the-box function. But let me just sort of show this here. The problem, well, let's do ornamental break, right? So now I have this here, and it also pushes everything down, which is not something that some tools do. This is so helpful because it's just like a baseline how to make your doc, how to make your book look a little bit more professional right out of the gate. And you can also do something excellent like, if I go over here, you can put your ebook cover on this as well. So then you have your book title here, and you can actually just send that out as an EPUB file when you're working with ARCs or when you're working with different providers like BookBub or some of the awards who request an EPUB file. This will be just make sure your cover's in there, download, and you're good to go. So really, honestly, like I said, I made this much harder on myself because I started from scratch, but I do think that especially for your first foray, it's almost great to give yourself the opportunity to learn sort of how this functions and then graduate after this into a more sophisticated software, which is necessary for when you're going to do migrations to paperbacks. There are some other tools like Calibre, I could not be sure if I'm saying that right, or I think there's another one, Pandoc, but in my mind, I think Vellum is the most out-of-the-box easy, and like I said, if I hadn't sort of started here, I would have been much more confused in some of the more complex software, so just getting this experience was almost worth whatever price I spent on this. Again, very limited in its capabilities. You're restricted to a specific design format, but it's almost important to do that for your first go-around. But like I said, this was my sort of first step in migration between Google Docs to EPUB, and later I'll show you the Google Docs to paperback format, which is entirely different than this, in a future show. So on that note, onwards and upwards.